10 times. Deborah Lee?
Hey, good morning, everyone. How are you?
Hey, Deborah Lee.
I want to follow up on that question and also just generally as we talk about amplified testing, both in resources and personnel, Mayor and Commissioner Barbeau, the question becomes, when will we have these resources? Because, one thing is pie in the sky in terms of what we need now and what we don't have, what the requests have been. But in order then for us to return to some semblance of normalcy, as per the administration, we'd have to get to zero transmission, and we'd have to really ramp up testing. When you look at it in light of opening up the city and the region for business, and particularly for schools as well, how can we achieve that with the resources in hand? And then specifically, can you tell us what kind of testing needs to be in place? When you talk to school leaders, they talk about these buildings having to be safe, with their gathering spaces for the community, for families, for parents, for teachers. How will you, in fact, be able to assure that come September, if that's the end goal now, that these buildings will be that? What will testing look like at that point when you have strangers coming in and out of the buildings all the time?
Great question. I'll start, and I know Dr. Barbeau will certainly want to comment on this. So, Deborah Lee, you've done your homework, obviously. I think you really framed it powerfully. Okay, so first of all, what I talked about last week with the phases, from widespread transmission now to low-level transmission to, you're right, zero, no transmission, effectively no cases or only very occasionally. Dr. Barbeau has said from the beginning to give us some guidepost, and we all understand it could change, but she said, look, September is a viable thing to be talking about, really getting back to normal, but no one's guaranteeing that. We're saying it's something we can shoot for that we think is realistic. And remember, when we talked about coming out of the current phase, this month we're going to be, unfortunately, in the widespread transmission no matter what. Next month, undoubtedly, for some of May, if not all of May, we'll still be in widespread transmission. We'll go into June. I hope we're either already moving out or start to move out in June. This puts, again, you raise the issue of the schools. This puts the schools' point in perspective again, given that it's so unclear when we even start on that pathway to low-level transmission. This is another reason why it makes sense to keep our schools closed. But then you talk about what would it look like. Well, we keep demanding a real timeline from the federal government. And look, unfortunately, from what we know right now, for the kind of level of testing we would need, really widespread, federal government is the only place where we could get the impact we need. We're working on the private market and every other tool we can find, but to really guarantee a constant supply, the federal government's going to have to do something very different than what they've done so far. It's clear they're still not using the Defense Production Act to the maximum. It's clear there's still not the level of coordination that we need to see on the federal level. We need to know that a lot of testing is coming and it'll be sustained. I don't think any of us believe that's happening, in the next few weeks. I think that's something that looks like a month or more away. And we just don't have clean answers on it. But it can be done. It's a matter of, using all their powers to make it happen. Because again, Deborah Lee, here is the fallacy. If the President of the United States or anyone else wants a recovery, and we all want it, right? But if you're serious about it, you can't do it without widespread testing. You cannot have a real recovery if you can't test people and you can't get this horrible widespread situation reduced so we can get down to low level. If you don't get down to low level, you're not going to have recovery. If your hospitals are constantly on the verge of being overwhelmed, you're not going to get a recovery. If your cities and states can't function, can't provide basic services because we're still in the middle of crisis and there's no revenue, you can't get to a recovery. You actually have to get the healthcare part of this equation right to be able to get the rest of the economic equation right. And I fear a lot of the time hearing the president and some others in Washington that they kind of want to skip a step and say, hey, let's just reopen, regardless of what it's going to take. And I think if you listen to some of the really great health experts, including Dr. Fauci, you hear the constant warning, get it right, do not take your foot off the gas, do not jump the gun, or you'll regret it when this disease reasserts. So that is my way of saying to you, to actually get to the day where we can get to low-level transmission that takes a lot of testing, so that anytime you need to test anyone, anytime you need to test people you're tracing in a group of people like those disease detectives from Department of Health do, they need a test available. Anytime we're trying to make sure that someone who has been in quarantine or isolation can come out, you need a test available. We have to be able to have it when we need it. That would then put us on the pathway to showing that transmission had gotten so low that you could have confidence in doing things like reopening schools in September. Doctor.
So to build on what the mayor just laid out, what I would say is, first and foremost, what the most important thing that we are doing right now to get us to that point of reducing transmission is the social distancing, is all of the things that are currently in place. Beyond that, this tightening of the supply chain for the swabs that are necessary for testing are part of a national and international challenge. And that's why we have been focused on ensuring that we target testing to those most in need, and that the testing of others is sort of ramped up as supplies allow. But the most important thing is that as we get to the point, or let me rephrase, the most important thing is we won't be able to get this over the finish line, if you will, if we don't have the supply that the mayor was calling for and the assistance from the federal government, because that's when testing is going to become that much more critical for us to ensure that when we identify additional individuals who do contract COVID-19, we're able to put the control measures in place to ensure that we go from low-level transmission to no transmission, and testing is going to be critical at that juncture.